In this video, I want to start using the layered shader node in Maya for what it was intended to be used for, which is to put different materials with different specular and bump and other attributes on the same surface using transparency mapping to differentiate between the various layers. So what I've got here is a model of a paint can. I made this out of a NURBS revolve. But you can certainly use polygons or whatever else it is that you'd like to model with. So it's just a straight kind of revolve here. I've gone ahead and made one shader already, which is this blend material, and the blend is I didn't really do that much to it except apply a fractal texture as the specular map. The fractal texture has its repeat U and V changed a little bit so that it's going to stretch this this specular highlight, vertically to give it a more anisotropic look without actually using an anisotropic shader. So with that created, then I'm going to set it aside. That's going to be one of the layers that I'm going to use. So I'm going to start working on the next layer, which is going to be the label. I'm going to create this next layer using a Fong material because I want to have a different specular highlight on the label. It's going to be kind of a shiny, glossy paper look. So that's why I'm using the Fong material. I've gone ahead and created a file that I want to use as my label. So what I'll do is I'll just bring in a 2D file texture node. And for the image here, I'm going to create my, it's my can label. It's a JPEG file. I also saved that as a PNG file. No, a lot of people don't like to use JPEGs. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and use this one. Now, when I apply this as a color map to the Fong, I want you to notice how this gets applied here. It's, the positioning of it, it's rotated in the wrong direction. It's also very, very large. I could possibly come in and rotate this frame 90 degrees. And then I'd have to move it and try to position this as a parametric texture. I'm running into some inherent problems here because of the way that this can has been created. I have a lot of edges here. I don't have a lot of edges coming down here. So it's going to be very difficult to texture this as a NURBS object with a parametric texture. If it was a polygon object, I could lay out the UVs with cylindrical mapping, but I want to show you a way that you can do this without having to worry about the parameterization of the texture, and you don't have to worry about the UVs. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this texture. In my Create button here, within the Hypershade, I have a section for 2D textures, and this is just another way of creating the checker, the cloth, the file, and so forth. But down here at the bottom, I can create this as a 2D projection. So when I create this file, it comes in with 3 nodes here. And actually, let's take a look at the input and output of those 3 nodes. And you can see that I have a projection node here, which acts in the same way as a slide projector. This file right here is the slide within the projector, and then this placement node is the position of the slide inside the projector. So you can, it's just like one of those little carousel projectors. If you rotate the slide, it can be upside down or sideways when it projects on the wall. This 3D placement node is the actual physical position of the projector. So if you need to adjust the projector, stick it on a dictionary so that it hits the screen, or you hang it from the ceiling. However you position the projector in your room, that's what this placement node is for. Now the projection node gives me a few different projection types. I can make a planar, a spherical, a cylindrical, a ball. So we've talked about the spherical and the ball as they pertain to reflection mapping. But in this case, our choice is obvious. We have a cylindrical paint can, so I'm going to make a cylindrical texture projection. And I'll drag this over and map that to the color, and in the file texture I'm going to select my can label JPEG. Now when I render, you can see that I've got this repeated texture. It's very, very short and repeats, I don't know, a dozen times on my can. But positioning this becomes extremely easy. The placement node of my projection shows up at the origin, and it's a cylindrical shape, and that's because I made a cylindrical map out of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into the top view and scale this so that it wraps around my my can, you know, based on the way that the actual dimensions are. You know, obviously, if you have something that's not a perfect cylinder, you're going to have to make a choice. You're going to have to try to make it fit. But in this case, you know, it works really well. So when I render this, you can see that I've stretched this texture out so that you know, so that it fits a little bit better on the can. I'm going to tweak that a little bit more, but I want to go over some of the other parameters with you. Selecting my projection node here, I have a U angle and a V angle. And the U angle is the amount that this wraps around. You can see that it's 180 degrees. So what actually happens is this projection will project 180 degrees around here, and then it repeats going around the back. Well, I don't really want it to repeat going around the back. I'd rather it wrap almost entirely around the can. So I'm going to take this, and the U angle, if I set that to 360, you can see that now my cylindrical projection has continued until it comes around full circle, and I have no repeat going around the back. If I look at the front of this, I can see my little Mr. Paint logo here, and if I go around to the back, you can see that I have my UPC code and my directions. Once I've got the cylindrical map wrapped around the way that I like it, I can scale this then in from the top to the bottom. So I can specify how much of this can I want this label to cover. So you can see that my label, which is bounded by these two blue borders, really only covers about 60 or 80% of the vertical distance of the can, and then it starts to repeat. It repeats again, going up and down. So the repeat is something that's pretty easy to fix. Within the placement node of the file, I have a wrap U and a wrap V, and I'm going to turn those both off. And so what that does then is it limits the coverage of this placement to exactly where the placement node is. I'm going to take this one step further, and in my projection node, instead of having it go all the way 360 degrees around my can, I'm going to make that maybe something like 325 degrees. So it's not going to cover the entire area. So you can see there's a little gap right there. That way when I render it, you can see that the label is just kind of stuck on and it doesn't meet all the way around. So that's the way that we would use this, this cylindrical projection node here to align the label correctly on the paint can. So here I have my two shaders. I have the blend that I created before, and I have the Fong that has the label map on there. So I can swap those out pretty readily. There's the blend right there, and there's the Fong. So my next step is to create a layered shader node, which we've already talked about in a previous video. We know that the attribute editor shows this staging area here with a green placeholder. So I'll take the Fong material, which I want to put on the outside here, and I'll go ahead and delete that placeholder. And then I'll take the blend material and I'll put that on the inside and render. And what I see is just the Fong. The reason for that, of course, is because I don't have any transparency and I don't have any mechanism to drop out any portion of this Phong to reveal that blin underneath. So that's what we're going to work on right now. And what we really want to do is project the transparency map in exactly the same position and in exactly the same way as we're projecting the color map. So in order to do that, I want to duplicate this whole piece of the shading network. So I'll select the projection node, and in my edit menu I'll select duplicate and shading network, and that's going to give me an exact duplicate of this entire network. Now I'm going to project this as a transparency map, but because I want this to always line up, rather than have two placement nodes here, I would like to place both of these projectors in the same exact manner. So I want to reuse this same placement node. So my hypershade window is starting to get a little bit confusing, so I would like to clean it up a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll take my Phong material here, and I'll shift and select my my secondary projection node, and I'm going to click on the input connections for both of these. So now you can see that I have one sort of projection matrix here that's a standalone that I'm going to use as the transparency map, and then I have one that is applied as the color map. So as I said before, I would like to be able to use this original placement, 3D placement node for both of these projections. So let's just line this up a little bit better so that we can see where they both are. And so the first thing I need to do is see what the connection actually is. So I'm going to hover my mouse over the connection, and I can read what it says. It's the place 3D texture 5 dot world inverse matrix 0 is the output connection, and the input connection is projection 4 placement matrix. So it's the world inverse matrix that's connected to the projection placement matrix. I'll drag this 3D placement node on top of my secondary projection node and click on Other, and that's going to bring up my connection editor. Now if I ever get lost and I forget what I'm trying to connect, I can just go back here and reread. So it's the place 3D texture world inverse matrix. So here's my world inverse matrix, and if I open it up I can see that there's the bracketed 0 that I'm looking for. And then the input connection is the projection placement matrix, and that's right here. So you can see that now my original 3D placement node is controlling this projection node. This new one is now connected to nothing, so I can go ahead and delete that. So now this placement node here is controlling both labels, or both projection labels. The next thing that I want to do is make sure that the labels align exactly in the same manner as they relate to the projection node. So that's a simple matter of taking the 2D projection node and using the same one for both. So this is my original. I'll middle mouse click on this one, I'll drag it on top of my new one, and I'll just connect that to the default. And that's going to just automatically replace this 2D node. So now I have both file textures placed exactly the same inside the projector, and I have both projectors placed exactly the same in 3D space. So the next thing that I need to do then is arrange this so that it's a transparency map. Now you remember that that we had adjusted the color offset and the color gain here. The color gain and the default color of our map. So we want the color gain here to be black or 0, and that's going to make this whole label area black. And then we want the default color, which would be this area around the label, to be white. All right, so the white is going to be transparency and the black is going to be opacity. So we'll take this projector and drag it on top of the Phong and map that to the transparency. We'll do a quick render, and you'll see, in fact, the whole transparency is dropped out, and that's just an error that I made. Let's just go ahead and show the output connections here, and let's show the input connections of the layered shader. And the error that I made was that I actually had the Fong applied to this and not the layered shader. So we'll apply the layered shader here and go ahead and render. And now you can see that the background of this label has dropped out. And what's really kind of interesting here is I've got two specular highlights on here. Remember, I had striped this the blend specular highlight so that it was kind of looked like an anisotropic material. And now I'm seeing that hot isotropic highlight there, which is the Fong. So we've learned before that just because something is transparent doesn't mean that it's invisible. So what's happening here is my label that has the Fong is also giving a kind of a clear lacquer coating to the outside of this paint can. If I take this Fong here and I'll take the specular color and make it black, which essentially turns this Fong into a Lambert material. You'll see that now I no longer get that Fong specular highlight. My label is flat Lambert, and what I'm seeing is the specular highlight of the blend peeking through. That's not an ideal situation either, because what I really would like to have is a nice shiny Fong highlight on my label that's stuck onto my can that has this nice linear kind of blend highlight. So what I'm really going to need to do is map the highlight for the Fong. Let's take a look at our Hypershade window and try to organize it a little bit more. I've taken my Fong layer here and clicked on the Show Input Connections, which is going to simplify my view a lot. I have two projectors here. One contains the slide that projects the label on here, and one projects the slide that projects the transparency on there. Both slides are controlled by the same 2D node, and both projectors are controlled by the same 3D node. What we want to do is create another projection that's going to project the specularity of the Fong. So we're going to follow the same process. I'll select the projector that contains the slide, click on Edit, Duplicate, and I'm going to duplicate the entire shading network. That's going to bring a new projector, a new slide, and two new placement nodes. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that this projector and this slide are controlled by the same placement nodes as the rest of my shading network. So the slide is easy. I just middle click on the placement node, drag it up here, drop it onto the default, and then I can get rid of the original. The placement matrix is a little bit trickier. I'm going to take the 3D placement matrix, drop it onto the projection, and click on Other. And if you get lost here, you can just take a look and see that it's the World Inverse Matrix 0 connected to the Projection Placement Matrix. So over here is the World Inverse Matrix 0, and over here I'll connect it to the Placement Matrix. That disconnects this, which we can then delete. So now I have another projection node that I want to use for my specularity, and I think what I'd like to do is simplify this a little bit. I'm going to create a surface shader and temporarily assign the surface shader to my can. It's black, so we're not going to see anything, and actually to be able to see this, I'm going to click on my camera here and change the environment to a light gray here so we can see what's actually happening. There's my black can there, and I'll take my slide and drop it on there onto the default setting. So now you can see that I have a let's just make that a little bit darker. So now you can see that I have this label on this gray gray can. So what's actually happening again is that the default color here, this gray, is what's highlighting everything behind the label. So thinking of this as specular, I know that this label layer, I don't want any specular highlight around the can. I want the blend to peek through. So I'm going to take the default color and make that black. So now this black area is going to receive no specular highlight. As far as the highlight on the label itself, it's going to be a two-step process. The first thing I'm going to do is multiply all the values here by 0, and that's going to drop the value of the label down to black. So I've got a black label against a black background. Then I'm going to take the color offset and I'm going to add value to that black. So if I add that all the way up to white, I'll have a white area here on top of a black area. When we map that to specular, this is going to receive full specularity. This is going to receive no specularity. Now, if I know what that level is going to be, I can just adjust the color offset to some 50% or 60% or whatever, so that my specular highlight is restricted to that one area. Then I no longer need this surface shader. I'll take this projection, I'll map it to the Phong specular color, and let's go ahead and take this layered material and put that back on the can, and then we'll render it. And now you can see that I've got my blend specularity over here. Let's just adjust this so that we can see, maybe we can see a little bit more of the Phong highlight on top of the layer, the label. So yeah, you can see now that I've got the striated blend highlight here underneath the label, and then right here I'm getting that kind of isotropic highlight that represents that plastic of the label. So I want to add one more layer to this paint can, and that's going to be a layer of paint dripping over the top edge of this, and I want it to be a kind of a thick paint, so I'm going to give it a little bit of a bump map. In preparation for this, I have created a couple of Photoshop files. The first one is this black and white drip, and I'm going to use this as a transparency and a specular map. I know that I can invert this in Maya, so I really only need one black and white file. If I'm going to use this as a specular map, I know that I don't want this pure white specularity, but I can multiply that down by using the color gain attribute, and then I can invert this to make a transparency map so that the drips are opaque or black, and the this background is white or transparent. The other part of this that I created was a blurred version of it. It's the same file, but I just added a Gaussian blur to it. And I'm going to use this as a bump map. And the reason that I wanted to blur it is because the blur is going to soften these edges and give a kind of a rounded look to these paint drips. You know that when it's white, it bumps out, and when it's not quite white, it doesn't bump out quite as much. So by blurring it evenly across there is going to give a really nice thick look to my paint. So let's get started. Before I do anything, I don't want to be confused very much about the different layers. So I'll come in here, and on my Phong 2, I'm going to rename this, and I'm just going to call this label Phong. Whatever I name my nodes, I always like to put the type of node that it is in the name, so I know that that's a Phong, and I know that this is going to be a blend. So this is going to be the can blend, and so those labels are going to propagate to the layers that I have in my layered shader. So I'm going to select a new Phong material here, and I'll add that to my layered shader. And this one is going to be called Paint Phong, just so that I can keep it straight. And I know that I want the paint Fong to be all the way over on the left. That's going to be the outside. That's going to be the outside node. So paint Fong on the outside, label Fong in the middle, and can Blinn on the total inside. So I'll take the paint Fong and I'm going to make that a color. So I'll just make that a dark green. And when I render it, I'm going to see just dark green on the outside. So the other thing that I did here was I made my cylindrical projection invisible. That was easy enough to do. You just select the placement node here, and you can toggle the visibility on or off. The reason I wanted to toggle that off is because I'm going to use another one for the paint Fong, and I don't want to get the two of them confused. So I can just just toggle that visibility off. So I'm going to create another file texture. And again, I want to make sure that my 2D texture node is set to projection. And I'll create a 2D file. This comes in as a projection node. And it has the elements, the same elements that the other one had. So let's just take these two nodes here and show our input connections, just to simplify things a little bit. Now my projection node, I need to set that like I did with the other one so that it's a cylindrical projection. And I'll take my placement node and scale it up, because I want this to fit around the outside of this. Maybe I can do that in the top window. You can see that it fits around the circumference of my can pretty nicely. And then in the front view, I'll pull it up so that it that it covers the height of the can. I'm going to make some fine tunes later, but what I'll do is take this projection node here and I'll put that on as the I had that on the color, but I don't want it to be the color. I'll put it on as the transparency, and for my file I'm going to just take the drips node that I had here and I'll invert them. So coming back into my file node here down at the bottom under the effects section, I have a little checkbox that says invert. That's going to give me black drips, which would be opaque against a white background. So that's the transparency of my Fong. So let's just take a look and see what that does. Okay, so so we're seeing the drips pretty nicely here. The only problem is that they're gray, not green. So I don't know why this color didn't take, but I'm going to just make that a green Fong instead, and then here are my drips. Okay, so the drips are nice and even, and they're underneath the lip of this thing, and I don't really want that to be the case. So I'll select my my placement node and I'll push it up a little bit so that that I'm covering the lip. All right, and now if I look down at the bottom here, you can see that I'm starting to repeat underneath, and again that's going to be the wrap. So I'll take my my placement node here and I'm going to turn off the wrap U and the wrap V, and that should take care of that that green on the bottom. Down here, my default color is gray. So what that means is that in the area that's below where my placement node is, I'm going to be seeing a semi-transparency. So I want to make that default color white. That's going to make that completely transparent. So it's wherever it's white, it's transparent. Where the file ends right here is going to reveal the default color. The default color is also white, and that represents transparency. So so I've succeeded in that that area. So just like in the last case, what we have here is a Fong shader on the top here, and what we're getting is this Phong specularity, as though it's on some kind of a clear, glossy layer on top of everything else. So we're getting a double specular here. So the next thing that I want to do is map the specular so that we only see the specular highlight where the paint is. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. In this case, I will take my projection node and I'll duplicate it. Duplicate the whole shading network. There are some shortcuts to doing this. Once you really understand, the structure of this thing, you can take whatever shortcuts you want. But again, I want this projection node here to be controlled by this placement. So I'll just drag and drop that on top. Do the same thing I did before. Click on Other. I want to take the World Inverse Matrix 0 and map that to the placement matrix. That's going to disconnect this, which I can go ahead and delete. So now both of my projection nodes are controlled by the same placement here. And now I want both of my file textures to be controlled by the same placement node as well. So I'll take my placement node from my original file and I'll drop it on here and map that to the default, and then I'll just disconnect this one. So now everything is lined up exactly right, and for this file here I'm going to turn invert to off. So when invert is off, I'm going to use this as a specular map. The color information passes to the projection node. We middle mouse click on the projection node and connect that to the specular attribute of our file. So again, I've got the black is exactly as I want it for that Phong, but the white part is maybe a little bit too blown out for the specular. A default specular highlight really is only about a 40 or 50% gray. I can take the color gain of this and I can multiply those values down. Of course, multiplying the black by anything other than black or anything is going to just give you 0. So this is really only affecting the light color, so that's going to affect the specular highlight just on the paint right there. And then, of course, I can take this paint Phong and take the cosine power and increase that. So I'm going to get a tighter, brighter highlight on the paint than I do on the label, and then of course the highlight on the can itself is a blend, so that's giving me 3 different specular highlights. So the next thing that I want to do is a bump, and it's going to be exactly the same procedure. I'm going to do something a little different here. You can do it either way you want. This is just going to shortcut one of my processes. I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate, and this time I'm going to duplicate it with its connections to the network. That's going to preserve one of the connections that I want, which is the connection to the 3D placement node, but it's also going to give me a connection to this file that I don't want. So I can just go ahead and break that connection by highlighting the arrow and hitting the backspace key. I can create another file texture, and in this case I'm going to create my 2D texture just as a normal texture, and that's going to come in with its own placement node. I know I don't need that placement node. I'll drag this one on top, and then I can get rid of this. This file I'll drag over and map that to the image of this projection, and this is going to be the bump map. So I'll load in my blurred image on this one. So this is called Drips Blur 2, and then I'll just drag this projection and I'll map that to the bump map. So now we can see that I've got I've got a really nice thick drippy paint that's showing a lot of bump and a lot of dimension sitting on top of there. So I've got 3 different specular highlights, one for the paint, one for the can, and one for the label. I've got a different bump map here on the edge of the paint, and so that's that's pretty much the way that that this layered shader works. Of course, there's ways that you can tweak this a little bit. This bump map here, which is just a blurred version of my black and white drips, you know that I can use the color gain and color offset to change that. If I want it to bump a little bit less, I can drag that down and multiply those down. But I can also put some texture on here by creating some sort of a black and white map. I'm going to use a fractal here, and I can just map that to the color gain attribute. And what that's going to do is just multiply all of those gray values by whatever that fractal is. So looking at it closely and doing a quick render here, you'll see that I've got a lot of texture now on my paint. It's very rough and fractally. So I can bring down the amplitude of this and soften it a little bit. I'm going to take the repeat and bring that down to like 0.2 and 0.2, and maybe bring the coverage up to 2 and 2. So by increasing the coverage, what I'm doing is I'm stretching that fractal so it would cover an area that's twice as big, and by reducing the repeat, I'm making it a little bit smokier. And so you can see that that's going to give me a little bit of a different kind of a texture to this. Right here you can see that it looks like it's kind of drying. It's a little bit rough. So so whatever works for you. You can also then play around with the bump node that was created. I've got a bump 3D, and here's my bump depth. So let's make that a 2 and see what that is going to do for us. It gives a little bit more bump, and let's try to soften this fractal down a little bit. I'll take the amplitude and make that like a 0.15 and just give it a little bit of a roughness. So there's a lot of ways that you can do it, but the bottom line is that we're using one single shading node to create 3 different effects on the can. Let's look at the input and output connections here. Here's our layered shader, so I'll look at the input connections here. It looks a little bit complex, but since we built it stepwise, we can divide this up into its different pieces. This top piece is my blend, so that's the inside of the shader. Down here is the, this middle is the label. So this is everything that that contributes to that label. Remember, we had 3 projections there, and this bottom area is the paint and the bump. All feeds into this and creates that paint.